China, the canary in the global economy. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights brought to you by Ainslie Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. Today, we welcome back Alex, who's been looking at, the numbers we're getting out of the US last night, but specifically looking a little bit further abroad into China and what's going on there, because that could be giving us a little bit of insight beyond the current situation to what we can expect next. So how are you going today, Alex?
I'm going well. Thanks for having me again, Chris.
Really interesting article today that really gave us some specifics that I found quite fascinating about what's going on in China, because everyone was focused on the number last night coming out of the US with CPI sort of surprising a little bit to the downside, that there wasn't quite as much as inflation as some people were expecting. But I think it was really useful to look beyond that to what you were looking at in China. So can you give us a bit of a background about what's actually going on in China at the moment?
So yesterday, the headline was clearly missed, with the Bank of China dropping rates by 0.1%. So from 2%, which is very low compared to where everyone else is sitting, by 0.1% to 1.9. And they also injected 2 billion yuan into the system because they are basically now facing deflationary pressures in China. So as the West is battling inflation and pushing very hard to get it down, it is pushing back on supply chains. And, you know, we've talked about there's just this massive lag between an interest rate goes up. What is the downstream lag? Well, when you've got supply chains that might be 3 to 12 months or even longer in some cases with shipping, it's going to take that long to feed back through. So what we looked at today is where this deflation is coming from and what's actually going on in China. And the numbers are pretty stark now. They've been dropping for a while, but some of the numbers that we've looked at was, say, the youth unemployment's just reached a record 20.4% of 16 to 24-year-olds are out of work. Now, that's in a country with a one-child policy and an aging population. So that is just an enormous amount of young workers that are graduating from university or leaving school looking for a job that are unemployed. So it doesn't paint a great picture for the economy. Similarly, the reason the Bank of China dropped interest rates yesterday had more to do with the import figures and PPI figures that came out about a week ago. So PPI dropped, went negative, and like a large negative number, 4.6% about 7 days ago. But interestingly, the imports have now dropped to 7.9% in the month.
Yep.
So in the month of May, imports of components to China dropped 7.9%. Now, those figures are obviously spread across a lot of things, but the one that was really interesting was actually out of Korea, which talked about their shipping month on month drop to China was about 20%, whereas the semiconductors dropped 36.2% month on month.
Massive numbers. And I suppose what really struck me most was I'm still hearing in a lot of the probably mainstream media, when they talk about this, your CNBCs, your Bloombergs, they still keep mentioning this reopening narrative. And those numbers do not line up with a reopening narrative. They're massive misses. That's a huge drop.
Well, 2022 was the lowest rate of growth China's ever seen. They reopened, they put some QE into the system, which they've done again yesterday. But with that sort of unemployment rate, they're not having the story they want, which is the pull through from their consumers.
Yep.
Because imports of Chinese goods from Germany and the US are dropping dramatically. So it is all just falling off a cliff. But, you know, looking at the componentry, looking at what's going on as exports go back to the US from China, the feed-through rate of these goods will only be coming through in the next 3 to 6 months. So China's, exports and things have been dropping for the last 7 months, but so it will be starting to feed through, and we probably saw that in the US last night with a miss on the CPI. But if May had things like shipping month on month dropping by 27.5%. This is not going to be a steady contraction. This is going to be a cliff, and the cliff has just hit China. And so it's going to start hitting the world in the next 3 to 6 months.
That's something we need to be definitely paying attention to, because I can see how that absolutely flows through, exactly like you're describing, as a cliff, because people really aren't expecting that yet. We're still very much caught in that inflation narrative. So what was China's reaction here? Because you mentioned that they're effectively actively injecting money. That's really QE. So
yeah,
what's going on? How are they actually reacting to this?
Well, they've dropped the rates. They've injected QE. They're trying to stall their property drops. So you've got developers now offering bars of gold to buy properties. They're trying to stimulate things, but unless there's not, they're trying to stimulate it by getting their economy, their consumers buying. It's not happening, and the world is dropping off at the same time. So they're going to be left with their hands tied unless they do more QE, which every economy seems to do that in a reaction to a deflation, and it seems to be what's about to happen there.
And I wonder, because the specific point you mentioned before about the youth unemployment as well, I wonder if that really makes this a slower process for them, because they just throwing money at it may not solve the problem if they can't solve that structural underlying issue of the young people coming out of university not being able to get a job, for example. I mean, that seems like a much bigger issue to solve than
because they're the frivolous consumers, right? So they're the ones that you want buying things. If they can't get jobs, it's not going to help the consumer situation in China. So you've just got supply chains now. So just talking about a couple of supply chains. So look at shipping, for example. So in the article, we looked at what's happened with shipping recently. 42% year on year drops in shipping right now. So my understanding right now is in the shipping industry, freight is now cheaper than it was pre-COVID. So that's back to normal. You've got supply chains of semiconductors, which were the main bottleneck, as you remember, during COVID. Well, that's all freed up now. I was looking at polypropylene the other day. The world's now at 80% capacity, like use of the capacity, and we've got gas prices falling, which are going to lower those. So just looking at some key supply chains, they are dropping, and very rapidly. So these figures and these numbers have to be feeding through to goods in the next couple of months. And I think, and we spoke about this before, we're going to start to see bigger and bigger misses in the inflation expectations, because I don't think people are pivoting fast enough.
Yeah, and I can see why that would be a miss as well, because some of those examples you just mentioned, I don't think people, like if you were just talking to the average person, or even the average economist or market commentator, I don't think they're really thinking about some of those component markets that you're talking about, or looking at them in any detail. So it is genuinely a surprise to them when inflation falls, because they're going, well, they're not looking at all the earlier stages in the process. They're only looking at the end of the process of that supply chain. They don't look, and that's really the whole point that you're highlighting today. You have to go back and actually look at the start of the chain, because that's where it all flows from, isn't it?
That is. And, that's why the article today is China, the Canary in the global economy. If they're starting to show such significant weakness, they are deflationary almost, I'd say. They're borderline. It has to feed through. It's not, it's a global economy. Everyone has insulated their economy a little bit since COVID, but it doesn't change where a lot of things come from, and it's going to continue by the look of it. You've got OPEC cutting output, and the price is still dropping.
And that has to tell you something. Yeah, that's particularly in this environment. If they're cutting supply and the price is still dropping, that there's a message there.
Yeah.
So I suppose the big question for us then is, where does this leave us here in Australia? Because does that mean deflation is back universally, or does this become a regional story? Like, do you end up with specific areas around the globe experiencing inflation while others are having deflation? Is it still a bit of a battle going on between inflation and deflation? How do you see that playing out for us specifically here, but also, the world is not just one location. It's a lot of different locations. How do you see that playing out?
So the main trading partners, we're a trading partner of China, but we're exporting to them. So I would expect our export numbers to start dropping. Iron ore, it'll feed through on prices for commodities. Whereas US, other countries that are importing a lot, that deflation's definitely going to go there. So for US and Germany, you're going to see it. But the structural issues that have now been cemented into Australia and the UK with two things. Firstly, their energy policies have absolutely crippled things. We're still paying more than we were before the Ukraine war. The rest of the world is now under. We've got gas prices dropping. So we just have...
That is your pet peeve, the gas prices.
Screwed our policy, and that's fine. And then we've got immigration, which is still driving property bubbles. And that is got both of those issues are both seen in the UK and Australia. And it's no wonder then that we have some of the highest inflation now in the world compared to the rest of the world. So we're not going to see the feed through, I don't believe, that some of the other countries are, unless the fiscal policies are fixed in those countries. But places like the US and Germany is currently in recession. It is feeding through to there.
Yep.
You had US missing on numbers last night. It is feeding through there. So they're the ones that are going to rapidly have this feed through happen. And Australia and the UK, it is going to be slower, sadly.
Okay, so we've got to keep watching what comes overseas, but I suppose the benefit there is really the highlighting again what you were pointing out in the article. We can see what's coming. So maybe that's the glimmer of hope there for Australia, is that we can be watching, because it is going to take longer to flow through, as you've said. Then, at least we can see what's coming a little bit ahead. We've got a little bit of warning, and maybe it's not such a surprise. And we can, theoretically, we can adjust to it, but then that relies on policy, doesn't it?
That does. But I also think that when you're creating asset bubbles within your own economies, then the collapse is worse. So I'm not necessarily sure we'd be as prepared as we should be.
Right. So maybe not the glimmer of hope I'm looking for. Well, Alex, thanks for that. As always, I think that's really given us a good overview of what we can expect anyway from a bit of China watching. And often people don't like to go there. They sort of just want to focus on the US and what's happening now. But I think that's really adding to our general understanding by looking that little bit further down the chain. So thank you for that. That's
okay. I think sometimes there's skepticism with China data, but there's plenty of data out there like shipping and exports to countries that people can see. And the China is showing what it appears to be happening.
So even that's right. Even if you don't necessarily believe a specific number, there's enough data sets.
Evidence.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence building up to actually paint a picture. So you don't need to rely on any particular data point.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And thanks everyone for watching. Remember, any questions or comments, reach out on the social platforms and someone will get back to you on those as soon as we can. That's us for today. We'll be back tomorrow with Sam to discuss all things markets and metals as we do. Until then, have a great rest of the day.